Hello, welcome to Memory Matters virtual talk series sponsored by the Johns Hopkins Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. My name is Ryan Dougherty. I am a postdoctoral fellow here at Johns Hopkins, and today I will be talking about physical activity and cognitive health. During today's talk, I will begin by describing physical activity and some of the known health benefits. I'll then go over a few research studies that investigate whether physical activity may help maintain cognitive function throughout older adulthood. And then I will end with sharing some tips and resources with how to become more physically active. Physical activity is defined as any bodily movement that requires energy. Walking a dog, household chores, working in your garden are all examples of physical activity. Whereas exercise is a form of physical activity that is planned, structured, and repetitive with the goal to improve health and fitness. For example, walking on a treadmill 3 days a week with the purpose to improve your fitness level would be considered exercise. Now, it's important to note that you do not need to partake in a structured exercise routine to experience the numerous benefits of a physically active lifestyle. We know that just a single bout of physical activity provides immediate health benefits. It improves your quality of sleep, it reduces feelings of depression and anxiety, and also lowers your blood pressure. And it also results in feeling more energized and less fatigued throughout the day. There are also numerous long-term benefits to regular engagement in physical activity. Adults who are physically active have a lower risk of heart disease, stroke, and type 2 diabetes. Regular activity also reduces the risk of several forms of cancer. It helps adults maintain a healthy weight and keep strong bones. And it also helps maintain balance and coordination. However, what I'll be focusing on today is the evidence that physical activity may be a key factor in preserving cognitive function and reducing the risk of dementia. We know from research that there isn't a single cause of dementia. It likely develops from multiple factors, including your genetics, lifestyle behaviors, and the environment you live in. Now, while some of these risk factors, such as age and genetics, can't be changed, there are modifiable factors that I have listed here that we can influence to potentially lower the risk of developing dementia. So now I'm going to tell you about a few research studies that speak to the benefits of physical activity. This first study here is unique because it examines 7 modifiable factors that are believed to increase the risk for dementia, and they're listed here at the bottom of the screen. In this study, the researchers estimated what the effect would be on dementia prevalence if we were able to reduce these risk factors in the United States. The graph here is displaying the number of dementia cases that may be prevented if there was a 10 or 25% reduction in each risk factor. For example, it is estimated that around 30% of US adults are physically inactive. So the values corresponding to physical inactivity are estimating the number of dementia cases that may be prevented if we were able to decrease the overall number of physically inactive adults. This study found that of the factors investigated, the largest proportion of dementia cases in the United States were potentially the result of physical inactivity. Now, importantly, we know that physical activity has a direct effect on several other of these modifiable factors. If you think back to the beginning of this talk, I shared how physical activity lowers depression, hypertension, obesity, and diabetes. And now because of this, physical activity may have an even more pronounced effect on reducing the number of dementia cases in the United States. Similar to that previous study that relied on estimated physical activity, there is a substantial amount of research demonstrating that adults who self-report higher levels of physical activity have a lower risk of cognitive impairment. And this has shown not to depend on the participant's sex, race, or ethnicity, suggesting activity is beneficial for all adults. However, the studies that incorporate these self-reported questionnaires do have limitations, one being the ability for participants to accurately remember all of those past activities. As I'm sure everyone in the audience can relate, it may be difficult to remember exactly what you did over the past week or month. Another way we can study the cognitive benefits of physical activity is by investigating what happens when we ask participants to follow specific exercise routines. In these studies, participants come into the lab or an exercise facility approximately 3 times a week for 6 to 12 months and perform a structured exercise regimen. And what we see is that these trials generally result in small improvements in cognitive and brain function. One of the key findings from exercise interventions is that the intensity of physical activity seems to be an important factor. Interventions that incorporate a higher intensity of physical activity typically result in larger cognitive improvements than compared to lower intensity interventions. I mentioned the importance of intensity. So what do I mean by that? So there are 3 domains of physical activity intensity: light, moderate, and vigorous. Light intensity includes those activities that do not require too much effort. These activities can be done while singing a song, such as household chores or a leisurely walk. Whereas moderate intensity activities get your heart rate elevated and require you to breathe a little heavier to the point where you can still carry on a conversation, but you're breathing too heavy to sing along with the song. A few examples would be yard work or a brisk walk. And vigorous intensity activities are those where you can only get out a few words without pausing for that next breath. So here you can imagine climbing up multiple flights of stairs or hiking up a very steep hill. Now, with the relatively new technology of wearable devices, researchers are able to accurately measure the duration and intensity of physical activity behaviors. So here, participants would wear a small device, typically on their wrist or around their waist, which records their daily physical activity patterns. Now, there have been a lot of studies over the past few years investigating device-measured physical activity with cognitive health. However, I'm going to highlight one specific study that received a lot of popular press over the past few months, and for good reason. It is one of the largest studies to date to explore the association between device-measured physical activity and future risk of being diagnosed with dementia. The study included over 78,000 older adult participants that wore a wearable device on their wrists and then completed a follow-up visit 7 years later to determine their cognitive status. The researchers found that compared to inactive adults, those who took approximately 4,000 steps per day were 25% less likely to develop dementia, and adults who took approximately 10,000 steps per day had a 50% decrease in their dementia risk. One of the very interesting findings from this study was that the intensity of the daily steps seems to be an important factor. Adults who acquired approximately 30 minutes of moderate intensity steps had the lowest risk of developing dementia over that 7-year period. The study does a really nice job of demonstrating that both the amount and the intensity of physical activity are important for maintaining cognitive health. So now we have the question of how much physical activity do you need? That previous study suggests both the overall amount and intensity may be important factors for preserving cognitive function, which actually does align with the current public health recommendations. States adults should engage in 150 minutes of moderate intensity physical activity per week, which translates to 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week. Now, these guidelines also advise 2 days a week of muscle strengthening activities. Now, it's really important to stress here that any activity is better than no activity. Although getting in 30 minutes of physical activity most days of the week should be the goal, even small amounts of activity have numerous health benefits. All right, so summarizing what we know so far. We know that physical activity is a key factor to preserve cognitive health throughout older adulthood. We also know that the intensity of physical activity is an important consideration. Partaking in those activities that elevate your heart rate and require you to breathe a little heavier appear to be important for maintaining cognitive health. And now I know I did not discuss the research investigating how physical activity impacts the brain, but this is an ongoing area of research. There is evidence showing that physical activity leads to cellular and molecular changes in the brain. There are structural and functional brain changes associated with physical activity. And we know that physical activity leads to behavioral changes, such as improved sleep and decreased depression. And all of these factors likely play a role in preserving brain and cognitive health. Hopefully by now I have convinced you to become more physically active. If so, there are a few things to consider. First is to start slow. Don't feel that you need to go from being inactive to acquiring 150 minutes of activity per week. Potentially just start with reducing your sitting time throughout the day and then slowly add to your activity level each week. I'd also encourage you to find activities you enjoy doing. If you really dislike going to the gym and walking on the treadmill, don't do it. Find other hobbies you enjoy. This could be walking with a friend or hiking through a state park. It's also very important to set goals for yourself, both short-term and long-term, with the ultimate goal of making physical activity part of your daily routine. I'm going to end with sharing a few resources from the National Institute on Aging and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Both of these websites offer really great information with how to become more physically active. Thank you very much for your attention.